Hey, everybody. Welcome to Question Christianity. We are live tonight. Tonight, you can expect an interesting show. We've been covering current challenges to the cross for a couple of weeks. What we're doing is taking a look at some current issues going on and current movements within various social circles. And we're comparing, are they compatible with Christianity? Is this something Christians could be associated with? Are there problems? Are there points of agreement? We're taking a look at all these things and comparing it through a Christian worldview lens. So last couple of weeks, we've addressed some issues such as social justice. We've taken a look at the Black Lives Matter statement, which we all unequivocally agreed with. And
Statement.
yeah, the statement,
Sure.
and looked at some current issues within the culture around us, particularly in the U.S., and some of the race issues that are there. That was last week. So just to give this episode tonight a little bit of context, we covered a lot of that stuff last week. So please go back and check that out as well, because tonight we're looking from a little bit of a different angle. We're actually going to look at the Black Lives Matter organization.
Can I just I just want to repeat what you just said. You just said it, and I just want to make it really clear, just by the nature of what we're going to do tonight. If it seems like we're starting down an issue and it seems like we don't have any sympathy for a certain segment of the population or whatever, that's what you're talking about, Caleb, is go back and listen. We spent a whole show talking about just how important some of those issues are and trying to sympathize and empathize with those positions. So, and you said it, and I just want to reiterate to those who inevitably might be coming to the show and seeing us just jump on in and maybe take some strong issues with some of the points. We're not doing that as square one.
Right. That's a perfect summary. These kind of discussions we have really have context as a really important key. So that's why we've taken our time the last few weeks to really be careful with our definitions and to lay the groundwork for having what's getting to be, deeper and deeper conversations on some of these issues. All right. Well, with that said, we will go ahead and dive in. This is structured just a little bit differently tonight because I want to take a look at what this organization actually describes itself as.
Right. Let's let them speak for themselves.
Precisely.
I don't want to put words in their mouth.
Nope. So we're taking a look at direct sources here. So this is all taken from blacklivesmatter.org. Every day they commit to healing ourselves and each other and co-creating alongside comrades, allies, and family, a culture where each person feels seen, heard, and supported.
Okay. The word comrade is a little weird, but perhaps they're using that in the spirit of its true definition and not trying to say something, at least in this point. Okay.
Right. Yeah. If we do that, I agree. I think
I wonder if,
good things.
I wonder if I disagree with anything here. Every day we recommit to healing ourselves. Okay. I mean, theologically, can we heal ourselves? But they're a secular organization, so fair enough. It's good to seek healing, and certainly you can get healing outside of theology, medical help. All right. So anyway, and each other, great. Teamwork, co-creating alongside comrades, allies, allies and family, a culture where each person feels seen, heard, and supported. I don't see anything wrong with that.
I would agree. I think that's pretty consistent for the most part with the way Christians would attempt to set up an organization. There may be some theology differences there, but from an organizational standpoint, I agree.
Now, I might put some things that I would say personally, if it was my organization, which it's not, that that might be more important than feeling seen and heard. But feeling seen and heard are important. I don't know that they're the most important, but I certainly don't disagree with the value of those things. So fair enough, man. Point one.
I would agree.
I love this organization so far.
They acknowledge, respect, and celebrate differences and commonalities.
2 for 2.
They work vigorously for freedom and justice for Black people and, by extension, all people.
Okay, so, well, I don't know. Do you want to go first?
I would say on the face of that statement, it's not that different from what we discussed last time. Now, it depends on how that plays out within an organization, and we're going to get to some more points about that in a second. But at face value, that's very close to what we said last week.
Yeah. I don't really have a problem with this, except I love what John MacArthur said just recently, and maybe he picked it up from someone else, but he said, justice doesn't need an adjective. I really like that. It's very clarifying. You don't need Black justice. You don't need racial justice. You don't need sex justice. You don't need any kind of justice. You just need justice. Justice is in itself all you need. For Black people, so that's why it's like justice for Black people. Yeah, because that would be justice. Justice for white people, justice for purple people. All, you just want justice, and they do say, and by extension, all people. So great, justice for all people. Great. I don't know why you need the qualifier there. I think you could end just with freedom and justice, and if it's true justice, then it will necessarily include those. But fine. Yeah. But I think we know what's coming. So I just like it's like it's kind of the warning signs are there, but that's all right.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, it could simply be an analogy of some ministries are specialized. Let's say Straight Street and Roanoke, and even more specialized. They rescue victims of sexual trafficking. So they might say that they work vigorously for the freedom of those particular victims, which by extension would
that's a really great point.
Women and victims. So again, at the face of it, at this point, I don't think the approach in itself is necessarily wrong.
Okay, so if we're keeping score, I think 3 of us agree with these 3 points. 3 for 3, 100%.
Yep.
Okay.
We intentionally build and nurture a beloved community that is bonded together through a beautiful struggle that is restorative, not depleting.
I'm going to need some definitions now. I guess on the face of it, let me think about that. We intentionally build and nurture a beloved community, great, that is bonded together through a beautiful struggle. A beautiful struggle. It's good to struggle. I think some of the most meaningful things that we do in life are struggles. Some of the most meaningful and purposeful things. It's hard to really say something really has purpose if it's not some type of a struggle, but a beautiful struggle that is restorative and not depleting. Okay. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I would think you would see this in a lot of spiritual fellowships would have language like this. Vague, spiritual and the vague.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, again, we're looking at face value here in these statements. And in and of itself, I can't see anything that I would take tremendous issue with here. I think on these points, we definitely have some common ground on these points.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. I really like the way you put that. I don't take issue with anything. That's a good point. Some things maybe aren't clear, but I don't take issue with them. It's like together with it through a beautiful struggle. I'm not sure what that means, but I don't take issue with it. It's certainly not saying anything on the face that I would disagree with. That is restorative, not depleting. Okay, sure, I like that. All right, three people for 4 points.
There we go. It's not a bad start. Let's see. Here we go. So here's some more points. This is all taken from the exact same document of their statement of beliefs on their page.
Well, we're starting to take a little bit of a turn here, don't we?
Yeah. So we're self-reflective and do the work required to dismantle cisgender privilege and uplift Black trans folk, especially Black trans women, and can continue to be disproportionately impacted by trans antagonistic violence.
Yeah. I might take issue with some of this.
Yeah, so, and just for the sake of definitions, cisgender typically means when your biological sex corresponds to the gender that you identify with. So you're cisgender if you're both biologically male and identify as male by gender.
I think. Were you done?
Yeah.
There's no category in God's world, in God's theology, and in Christian truth for any gender that is not cisgender. It's a false category. There is no such thing. There are men and women, and you are what you are. You are what you are biologically. All genders are cisgender. Whether, I know people wouldn't agree with that, but that's at least one of the first things we're going to have to take issue with. We're going to be forced to have to take that issue.
And it is important to take issue, or at least point it out at the very beginning, because if you give this premise away, then a lot of other things follow from that ought not follow, because this principle ought not be given away.
Now, I don't know the answer to that. I'm wondering what the intent of "we are self-reflexive" means. Well, I actually don't. I'm not sure what they're trying to say there.
If I had to make an assumption here, what I believe that is saying would go in line with a lot of what we see in critical race theory, which we're going to dive into after this, where the statement is intended as a way to indicate that, I think a better word than self-reflective may be
self-defined.
I'm not sure if there is a better word. I think, though, I'm trying to think of a clear way to put this thought, is within this kind of worldview, there's an idea that truth is disproportionately given to people who have more intersectionality checkboxes, if you will. So we talked about intersectionality a few weeks back and kind of defined this. So if you're part of multiple minority groups, these things intersect to give you a different perspective on life. And based on that, people who have more minority group status are going to have truth that is more real than people who check less of the boxes. So I think in saying they're self-reflective is probably a way to actualize that kind of statement and say, we recognize that we don't check all these boxes from every standpoint, but we're going to work to continue to bring about the voices that have more truth, if you will. And again, this is saying it all from a intersectionality and critical theory perspective.
It just seems like there's an important link there, because whatever they mean by self-reflexive, and then you get to the point where they want to do the work required to dismantle cisgender privilege. It feels like there's a link there. Okay, we're self-reflective, therefore we're going to do the work that's required to dismantle cisgender privilege. It really seems like, at least the way the sentence is structured, that there is a dependence or a natural outworking of whatever self-reflective is there. And so it was just kind of interesting to me to see that.
And maybe it'll work better putting it in this context. There was a book I read recently, and I want to make sure I get it right. And the some of the main points of this book, it was White Supremacy and Me, was the name of this book by Layla Saad.
Okay.
And one of the points of this book was that in order to begin to dismantle any type of privilege, it requires self-reflection of your own levels of privilege. So perhaps this is hitting on that same idea that self-reflection is required to deal with your own privilege.
Or oppression.
Right.
That would make sense to me. So if they're self-reflexive, therefore they understand from their point of view their level of oppression, that would make sense of, therefore we must do the work required to dismantle that which is oppressing us, which is the cisgender privilege. Okay. If someone wanted to correct us on how we're interpreting this, definitely I want to know what they think it means. We might be getting this wrong, but that at least makes sense so far.
Mm-hmm.
And uplift. So let's talk about cisgender privilege just for a second, or just the word cisgender. So I said that Christian theology is going to have to take issue with this. So am I saying that? Who's saying that? I would just say that, gosh, you know what? I have thought over and over again, it would just be so easy if we could just give into this. It would just be so easy. I wish. There's a part of me that just kind of wishes we could say, you know, it's fine. You know, you do you. Well, certainly you can do you. I don't want to control anybody. However, personally, I don't get to choose what's right or wrong. I think morality is subjective, and we talked about that before. So having said that, it was Jesus who said in Matthew 19, male and female he created them. In other words, what Christ himself was saying is that God makes male and female. I don't get to undo that. Even if I want to, even if it would make Christianity more palatable, if it would make me more palatable to society, I don't have that option. I don't have that option and get to remain faithful to my Lord. I don't have that option.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. And I think that some of these things, we talked about this with critical theory, deeply impact how you go about discovering truth, which is a major problem as well. You know, I do want to say before we move on, though, that, you know, I think we would all agree that we can certainly condemn any violence against people for their views, whether it's someone who's trans or someone who's gay. I think any disproportionate violence against those people for those reasons is wrong.
Why is that?
Because violence against anybody is wrong.
And especially the body part, because and this is really important. And this is, I think, another difference between, well, the Christian worldview and maybe what is a predominant worldview, which is Christians understand that there is a difference between agreeing with someone and valuing them as a human being, a valuable human being, an invaluable human being. We see no problem with the difference there. Matter of fact, we said almost necessary, since we would say of ourselves we are morally deficient. I would certainly say that of you, Caleb.
Yeah.
But even more so of me. So, so there are things that I do and have done that are they're morally wrong. I do them. I still do them. I won't enumerate them, but I do them. But I consider myself valuable, not because I say I'm valuable, because God has put his image on me and said that I'm valuable. And that goes for every single person in the human race, regardless of how they identify or what they do.
Yeah.
And so in that same light, I don't get the choice, if I'm going to be faithful to Christ, to devalue another human being. Again, it's not my call. He has made them male and female, and I am to value every human being and love my neighbor, period. Period. No choice there for me.
No further comment. You put that great. The next statement, we practice empathy. We engage comrades with the intent to learn about and connect with their context.
I'm gonna need you to help me with that one.
Again, I think this is one that captures the ideas of intersectionality and tries to put them in a practical sense. I think if we left off the rest and said we practice empathy, I think we would all 100% agree with that. However, what they're doing, I believe, is taking that and, again, tying that idea of critical theory and intersectionality to this, that people's context, the situations they're living in, and the groups they're a part of actually impact their truth.
Right. I would say that actually their statement isn't broad or strong enough. First of all, wanting to engage people with the intent to learn about them at every level, personally, certainly doesn't belong to that philosophy or any other. I would say that Christians ought very much want to do that. I'm thinking of something we did last year at Unity, and it was difficult. And it took us outside of our comfort zone.
But really healthy. I think that was really healthy.
It was difficult, but healthy. And people couldn't believe that we wanted to hear this for them. I mean, it was because it's so unusual. And that's why I say their statement here is too narrow. Who do they say they want to engage? Only the like-minded, their comrades.
Yeah, do they want to connect with me in my context?
Nope.
Okay.
They want to dismantle it a priori.
Yeah, and we're going to get into some very dangerous ideology here, which this is starting to have some ideological feeling to it, I guess. Well, so let's go back a little bit, especially Black trans women who continue to be disproportionately impacted by trans antagonistic violence. So what are they talking about there?
That's a good point.
I think if you ask them, they would not say that is, and I'm willing to be corrected. I don't think they're talking about physical violence here. I think they're talking about, maybe they are, but I don't think they are.
Well, it's certainly based on some of my readings of many of the popular bestsellers out there on kind of these topics right now. Violence is certainly something that is not limited to physical acts of violence. And
Words can be
not
violent,
right. And beyond that, non-words can be violent.
Oh, that's a new one for me. Interesting. So if I'm just silent and I fail to support, that might be taken as violence.
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, and I'm pretty sure I'm not, that violence begets or earns repercussional violence. And it's deserving of a return violence, which may include physical violence, right? So if I fail to enthusiastically support, if I'm just silent, if I just stand by and I don't enthusiastically support someone based on maybe one of these, in one of these contexts, then they might think that I deserve physical violence back.
That's certainly a possibility.
It's certainly in line with some of the predominant critical theory beliefs. Okay, so I have a real problem with that one. That's evil, I think. That actually, it's like if someone's standing by and they don't enthusiastically support you, especially when they might have moral or theological reasons where they're just like, I'm just doing my own thing here. Like, you're free to go do your thing. I don't agree with you. Like, I don't expect non-Christians to act like Christians. And and I know in their view, I'm the white patriarchy, and so I don't have anything that I could feel is violence towards me because I'm the ruling patriarchy. But truly, if the tables were turned, and they have been turned in the past, where Christians were the minority, were persecuted brutally. If someone didn't want to become a Christian, say in Nero's time, and they just stood by and it's like, I don't support what you guys do. Like, you're only about one God, and we like our pantheon. We're pretty happy with that, but like, go do your thing. And if they just were silent about it, I wouldn't feel like I needed to exert physical violence against them. It's dangerous. It's a license. It's a license to do evil.
Yeah. So yeah, it is dangerous because ideas have consequence. At the same time, we have to keep, reminding ourselves. Right now, we're analyzing propositional statements of an organization. So we're not saying that individuals necessarily who belong to the organization necessarily would follow what we're afraid the logic of this leads to, although they could or couldn't. We're strictly talking about the logic of these propositions, right?
Right. That's a really important clarification.
It's kind of one of the, it's like it's along the lines of atheism. So atheism allows for some pretty evil behavior because there's no intrinsic worth in human beings. But it doesn't mean that all atheists are immoral or even evil. Matter of fact, many atheists are wonderful, loving people. It's the ideology behind it that allows for it. Doesn't necessitate it. It allows for it. But so certainly your point is well taken. Yeah, not everyone here is going to be all on the evil side, but the ideology behind it does allow for it. And well, I'll leave it at that.
We disrupt. I think this gets to some of what we were getting at. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structural requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable.
It's interesting. There's a lot here. I just noticed this, that mothers and parents and children are comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. It's like, where's dad? It's mothers and parents. It's interesting. I don't know. Maybe that's included. Why not mothers and fathers? Because even if you had two mothers, I mean, you still could say mothers and fathers and fathers. Not that I don't agree with that, but it's just interesting that they it seemed like they tried to avoid that word. Okay, I don't want to put words in their mouth. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family. Well, I'm not sure what is Western prescribed about a nuclear family.
That's a good point.
What is Western prescribed? What is it? Well, how about some definitions? What's a nuclear family?
Well, let's look up a definition for that.
Fair enough. Western prescribed.
All right. So, according to Google, in most common usage, the term nuclear family refers to a household consisting of a father, a mother, and their children all in one household dwelling.
That was clearly invented during the Renaissance, I think. Was it Descartes that came up with Western prescribed? Okay, so you could admit that a nuclear family was something that existed before the West. So I'm trying to give them some leeway here. So maybe there is such a thing as a nuclear family, and it's been around longer than Western society, but maybe it's something that especially Western society prescribes. Okay, so then I'm not sure where it's prescribed. Maybe it's where's it prescribed? Well, so I certainly haven't. I don't. Even if it is Western prescribed, I don't think it's only Western prescribed. I think it's probably worldwide prescribed. I think it's naturally prescribed. I think it's theologically
I think that's
prescribed.
The best way to put it. It's naturally prescribed.
The fact that
which is maybe why they have an issue with it.
The fact that it's also normative in Western society doesn't necessarily make it bad. You're using this logic. Well, if it's practiced in the West, it must be bad. But of course, communism is a Western concept. Marxism is strictly European.
Marx, who's German, wasn't he?
So
Karl with a K, Marx.
European philosophy.
Yeah.
Anglo-European philosophy developed Marxism.
And Christianity was developed in the West?
No.
Christianity.
Middle East.
Oh, that's right. Okay. Got it. So actually, when I follow my Christian theology, which so I'm a fairly orthodox Christian, and I'm biblically, I would consider myself biblically orthodox, which means I try to follow the teachings of Jesus as best that I can figure those out, which means I don't really care what the West has done with Jesus. I don't really care about the Middle Ages. I don't really care so much about the Reformation as a rebellious act or as a movement. I appreciate the Reformation for what it did, which was just try to go back to what Jesus taught. So actually, I feel like I'm actually being more Eastern or Middle Eastern than Western in that. Although certainly I'm in the West, but I'm trying to obey this Middle Eastern teacher who's a pretty good teacher. He seemed to like the family, the nuclear family.
I'd say so.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think some people may take issue with what you just said as well, in the fact that in some of these organizations, and certainly in some of the prescribers of critical theory, they're going to take issue with Christianity for this same reason, in that they see it as a Western thing. And I think the clarification you've given is important, because it's not a Western thing. Now, that doesn't mean all the ideas within it haven't had a strong development within the West, but at its core, if Christians continue to go back to the original scriptures and try to get as close to those beliefs as possible, as you've mentioned, it's certainly not a Western thing.
Yeah, and maybe even those who might say, well, it happened in the first century, you know, under Roman rule, and so maybe that was a Western thing. It's like, well, you know, we as the biblically orthodox, I don't really like that term, but it's kind of clarifying. You know, we look at the Old Testament too. We look at the Old Testament morality and culture, although we don't. This is maybe an important clarification. We don't believe that we're still under the Old Testament, so we're free to not eat shellfish. But that said, so like that's way before Rome, and I think the New Testament carries on the same morality and the same value for, at least in this part, the nuclear family. That's thousands and thousands of years old.
What if we set that aside for a second? Is there anything wrong with any of these ideas we're discussing being a Western concept?
Well, actually, well, what do you mean by that?
So let's say we grant that the nuclear family was Western. Why would that be a bad thing?
Yeah, well, right. So it sounds like you're hinting at the genetic fallacy. Mm-hmm. And so the genetic fallacy, for those people, it may sound like I'm talking about like eugenics or genealogy. The genetic fallacy, genetics as in where things come from. The genetic fallacy, you can Google this, says that a truth is not validated by its source, basically. In other words, where I learn something or how I come to know something has no validity on whether or not it's actually true or false. So I can flip a coin behind my back and say it's heads, and I'm just guessing. And so it's not a good way to figure out something, but if I guess heads and it might actually be heads, right? So it might actually be true. And so because something is in the West, I think this is where you're hitting, it doesn't matter that it's West. The issue that we really need to focus on, and so maybe it's been a red herring, is the nuclear family a good or bad idea? And then who cares if it's Western? Maybe it is Western. Maybe it's not. Is it a good or a bad idea? Is it something that we should disrupt? That's a better question. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was trying to get at, as well as the fact that maybe we need to flesh out just a little bit why people are taking this term of anything that's Western and saying that it is wrong or incorrect or something to be disrupted.
Well, that's a deep subject.
I think there's a lot of freight here under the surface. Okay, so from the perspective of this organization, BLM, the organization, it's a priori, the Western society, that's just shorthand for patriarchy, oppression, systemic injustice, all that sort of thing is packed into the adjective Western. It's not unpacked for us here in their statement, but that's what's assumed. Yeah. So if you can attach a social unit like the nuclear family, the basic social unit, if you can attach that to the idea of Western thought and development, then you've disproven it in their view, which does commit the genetic fallacy, as Charles said. Another difficulty here, a sleight of hand, I think, is this maybe false dichotomy between what is meant by the nuclear family and extended family village type nurturing. All right. So in other non-Western societies, ancient societies, one thing that would be different from contemporary American nuclear families would be that, when you get married, when a man takes a wife, he would probably still live with his parents, perhaps, or on their land in an extended fashion. So they're not. So the nucleus is still part of a molecule, if you will, maybe in some configurations. What I'm getting at, taking a long time to the point is, they might, BLM, the organization, might rightly point to some of the healthiness of intergenerational family nurture. In other words,
Sure.
actually grow up beside your grandparents, all right, and others. But again, that concept and the concept of a husband and wife, biologically male and female parents, raising their children primarily, those aren't contradictory. All right. So, and I think that has to do with something that they're up to here.
I think you'd be hard pressed to find anywhere in the world, even where they had very supportive extended families and villages, where the mother and father weren't the primary caretakers and primary responsible persons for their children.
And were cisgender. So
yeah, pretty much everywhere in the world. Pretty much everywhere in the world. Matter of fact, I'd say that the places in the world where we are farthest from that are in the West.
We're so individualistic. Yeah.
Yeah. So if if they're fighting against this, they're fighting in the place that is actually the most supportive in the entire world towards it. I'm not. Now, certainly there are places still in the West that are fighting against it, but there isn't anywhere in the world where it's more supported than in the West. There just isn't. Okay. I think, at least for me, I feel like we kind of have to cut to the chase and get down to some of the core ideas of critical theory to understand at least this point. So, and this was really helped, made clear to me in Ben Shapiro's book, 3 Easy Ways to Dismantle America, or something like that. Was it 3 Easy Steps? Hold on. Yeah, 3 Easy Steps to Destroy America. Okay, so the idea is that under rest some of critical theory is the idea that individuals are blank slates, that they have no inherent nature. There is no innate human nature, that they are completely blank slates. Why is that important? Because if human beings are completely blank, then their behavior is entirely resultant on the culture in which they grew up in or were raised in. So then, if that's true, then if a human being displays any bad behavior since they were blank and since they exhibit bad behavior, that bad behavior must be directly to blame to the society in which they grew up in. There's really no human responsibility there. There's no inherent bad person. There's only a society that would result in a bad person. That's really an important understanding under critical theory. Because why is that important? Because what it means is, if you can find a society that has anything bad in it, the ultimate responsibility is the society itself, and therefore the society must be dismantled and reorganized because it's at fault. So when you remove true human responsibility, see, Christian theology is totally on the other end of this. We think that human beings are actually bad. Yep, we're bad. We have an inherent sin nature. We are, and if you don't like that term, then you can just understand that human beings are, among other things, innately selfish. That's certainly true of me. Like I try, I've been raised against it. I've got a lot of, thank God, I've got a lot of cultural and family upbringing that fights against it. But I'm pretty selfish under there in a lot of places. And I have a problem. I have a sin problem. So I do bad things, and I do them not because not because of the culture, despite the culture. But if I didn't do them because of my nature, then anything that's bad, anything that happens bad in the way the child is brought, if the child is brought up and the child isn't awesome, like virtually perfect, you can blame the society. And therefore you should tear down the society because it's resulting in bad people. And that's why you'd want to tear down the nuclear family. And that's why you'd want to tear down the rights outlined in the Bill of Rights, because all those things have obviously resulted in some bad behavior, and that's certainly true.
I think this final statement I've included here also gets at that exact same thing. We foster a queer affirming network when we gather. We do so with the intention of freeing ourselves from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking, or rather the belief that all in the world are heterosexual, unless he, she, or they disclose otherwise. I think all these points, like you said, they point to that very structurally based idea of people being blank slates and it being society that imprints problematic things on them.
That's not the last point for their organization, is it?
We didn't cover them all. They had about 20 points. And so I took a good number of them from it, wanted some we could agree with and some that would lead to some of the core discussions here. So no, we did not cover everything.
Was there one? I feel like there was one that either explicitly or implicitly implied a revolution. Maybe it was the dismantling part.
Yeah, there may have been a couple more that did. It's been a couple weeks since I read through that. These were some of the strongest worded ones. So, and I think this discussion is going to continue as we move forward as well. I think it's important to point out with this group kind of before we move on, and a couple things where Christians need to be aware of how to kind of respond to these things. I think we could all agree that some of the most important things about our response should be, is it loving? Are we engaging with people and hearing what they actually say? We can certainly disagree as we have here without dismissing the concerns. I mean, we spent the entire last episode discussing some of these similar concerns we're going to have. And so just because we disagree with points or even the way language is worded does not mean we're dismissing some of the same moral concerns that are brought up. And I've also listed here a group of alternative organizations, as well as some things that I believe people can personally do to help contribute to justice. And so there's another organization, everyblackLifeMatters.org, that is much more in line with Christian values, and I think values that are more uplifting to all of society. The Equal Justice Initiative, I believe we mentioned that last time with Brian Stevenson and his group that is seeking to right justice where it has not been served to many people on death row and within prison. And then personally for me, I think two of the most important things we can do are step out of our comfort zone and have these kind of conversations, and certainly condemn and fight racism where we can.
Yeah. I like how you started off with love. It's well, I'll just speak for myself. It's when you think about some of the things that are happening, like some of the points in the Black Lives Matter, and I mean, frankly, I think some of those ideas are just they're dangerous to society as a whole. They will end up hurting more people, including Black people. Like, it's going to end up hurting people. And so it can be very upsetting, but it's important to be upset at the organization, but love people. And that's difficult for me, but nonetheless, it's so important. Overcome evil with good. That's what Romans says. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good.
And I think it's important to point out some practical steps people can take as well in engaging with people from this organization or people who may be in support of it. So that's kind of why this is included here before we continue with our critical race theory discussion. Any other thoughts before we move on?
It's just so much of this is so touchy.
It is. It is. And, I think you gave us off to a good start in continuing this conversation, Charles, about critical race theory. Oh. So, what exactly is critical race theory? Again, with any critical theory type element, it's hard to put a really good definition on it. But as best as I've come to understand, it's really a framework for the social sciences. And it's used to examine society and culture as it relates to race, law, and power. I've included some of the major themes here as well. I don't want to take it up by just going through the slides, though. So, I really want to open this up. So as you guys understand it, feel free to bring up any of these points or expand on this.
Well, I don't see it on here. And so used to examine society and cultures that relate to race. So one of the major themes that I don't see on here as a bullet is the dialectic of power that underlines critical theory. And that is that people are necessarily split up into either oppressors or oppressed. There's no middle ground there. You're one or the other. And that undergirds everything else. It's just like, first you do this. It's very Marxist. Marxist only did it. He did the same thing. Only he only did it economically. So he said, they're basically the oppressors and the oppressed financially or economically. Like there's the poor and then the oppressing rich, and there is no middle ground. You're one of the two. You're either the poor or you're the rich. The critical theory or even critical race theory extends that to social types of oppressing and oppressor.
Yeah, and I didn't include that here because we did cover it some in the overall introduction to critical theory we did. But I think critical race theory expands on some of those basic ideas of critical theory, keeping the same structure, and looks really at how it specifically relates to the issue of race within law and power. And so, all these things we've been talking about tonight, I think, can be seen in some of these major themes here. Storytelling, naming one's own reality, very much relates to the fact that, people create their own, or society creates reality for people, and people's realities are where truth exists. So those who are most oppressed have the greatest grip on reality through their experiences. Because
those who are the oppressors can't see the reality because they're the oppressors. They're blinded by their status, their privilege. They're blinded by it. Yeah, so it's very interesting. It's once you understand that power dynamic or the duality there, these other things become more clear. Like, oh, I see what they're doing there. Storytelling, yeah. Like, so critical theory would not be a fan of freedom of speech. That might be actually startling for to some people, but not at all. Critical theory is not at all in support of freedom of speech, because, I mean, along with the idea that, well, freedom of speech is what we had, and therefore, since evil happened under this freedom of speech, then of course it's evil. So, but the storytelling, as you said, we could maybe even go through each of those. We don't have time, but yeah, the storytelling, like naming one's own reality. Like, if I'm oppressed, then my story matters, and you, the oppressor, you don't get to tell a story. You get your privilege. Like, check your privilege. You don't get to tell your story. You're not even oppressed. How could you possibly know what my life is like, or what people in my environment or of people like me are going through? You can't possibly know. So shut up and listen.
Right, and I think even related to, the freedom of speech, structural determinism is this idea that, the structure that's built within a society influences the content of that society, so much so that if a society is built by or largely influenced by an oppressor group, then even some of the key fundamentals within that society, it's not whether they are right or wrong. They are wrong because they are so heavily influenced by the structure that has been put in place by an oppressor group. So freedom of speech would be one of those things that could fall under this, as because oppressor groups created the Constitution, therefore freedom of speech as an outflowing of that is incorrect, because it doesn't match with one's storytelling.
Well, by the same reasoning, critical theory ought not be believed, since it was produced by white Europeans in the 20th century, the Frankfurt School of Social Thought.
Yeah.
Very good point.
But see, you really can't talk to a critical theorist about this stuff because you're not allowed to speak.
All right. That would be
frustrating.
To speak in a way that disagrees with any of this would be a microaggression.
Yeah. It's like it's
right.
self-affirming.
Sure. If we agree up front that they're right, obviously we couldn't, based on their own logic and the fact that they would be right and we would be wrong. But that's all circular. In other words, there's really no reason for any of this to get off the ground, logically.
Yeah, and totally valid. And if it does get off the ground, I think one of the most important things that we can talk about, at least at this point, is what happens then? What if this really does become, so to speak, the law of the land? It's like freedom of speech, gone. Category by race, in place. It's doing that now. It's like, you're white. It doesn't matter if you're white and sympathetic. It doesn't matter if you're not racist. You are white. You are racist. You're white because you are. You're racist because you are white. Because you are in that. Man, there's a body count associated with this. There really is. It's not fanciful. It's not paranoid. If this ideology continues in its natural course, then the violence done to one group of people will be naturally justified to have a counter violence done back to it. It doesn't matter that you weren't individually responsible, because there are no individuals.
Yeah, and this is really in tension with this idea of affirming the individual's right to create and name their own identity. But at the same time, the philosophical framework for this movement takes away the reality of individuality, reduces everyone to really just a social construct themselves.
Yes.
So it's a self-destructive system that's far from saving anybody or anything.
Yeah, there's no redemption, by the way. If you're part of the oppressor class, there's nothing you can do to be redeemed.
Right. I mean, the last point there on the empathetic fallacy, is it devalues empathy, even to the sense that, while some groups may praise empathy, they don't consider it enough or even a good starting point.
So what's their solution then?
Tear it all down.
Yeah, tear it all down.
So we're coming right up on time, but I want to end on a slightly more positive note and kind of break this down a different way. Because again, this is going to continue into our discussions for the next few weeks as well, as each of these episodes has kind of built on one another. But I think we have some shared concerns with those in critical theory, in specifically critical race theory, in that we should embrace hearing from people with different perspectives. I think that's a safe thing to say, that Christians should absolutely be willing to hear different perspectives.
Heck yeah.
And we should recognize that there are unconscious factors that influence both decisions and individuals. Now, that is not taking critical race theory as a whole and accepting it. But, we know that there are unconscious things that influence people, whether they recognize it, is another thing. And it takes work to recognize some of those unconscious factors that may be influencing you. And I think that's a personal work people can do. Sorry, just being quiet to give you a chance to dive in if y'all had anything y'all wanted to say. And then
I would like to say that, sure, absolutely, we all have unconscious factors. It's not the same thing as saying that there is systemic racism. Those are two different things. They're completely different things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of our biggest points of disagreement, granted, we've talked about a lot, but I think some of the biggest ones to encapsulate it are that, we would view empathy as a key to starting change. At least I certainly would view empathy as a key piece in influencing both individuals and society. I think we also have to be careful, as we've discussed here, in not overrating any single factor, in saying that, this is the be all and end all for why society is the way it is.
Gosh, that's so, I'm really glad you said that. That's so important. If you think that you have an easy solution to society, man, you need to think again. I mean, it's just, we can't even keep our own households in order or our own selves in order much of the time. And if you think you have an easy solution to fixing society at large, and you haven't figured out how to even manage your own life, man, that's dangerous. Matter of fact, one tends to lead to the other. It's like, my life is such a mess, and so I'm just going to blame society. And you know what the fix is? It's this. Go fix this, and that'll fix society, and that's going to fix my life. And man, it's just so dangerous. It's so dangerous. A lot of these changes that are proposed are huge, major, sweeping changes, and nobody knows. Not me. Nobody knows the gigantic repercussions that can and will result of that. You make small changes, they have gigantic results. You change the tax code a little bit and it has gigantic results. You start changing major things like freedom of speech and putting people in idealistic categories. It's just, you don't know. You have to be so careful about this stuff, and you have to move so slowly. And maybe we should move. Like, no one's saying that there shouldn't be change somehow, somewhere, but you got to be really careful. And if you think it's simplistic, man, danger, deadly danger.
Absolutely. And the last point here, and this could just be my perspective, but I don't believe truth is based merely on perspective. And I think that's where a lot of the core problems here come from, is when we base truth on perspective.
Truth is discovered. That's the best way to, wow, that's the best way for me to get a handle on what we're talking about when we're talking about truth. We don't define truth. We don't invent truth. We discover truth. Truth is out there, and we got to go figure out what it is. And now my subjective understanding that is always going to be subjective because I'm subjective, but there's an objective truth out there that is objective, and I need to discover it. So it's not based on anything. It just is. Truth is truth.
Yeah. Well, I think this is about as good of a stopping point for this discussion as we're going to get in a few minutes over. But I think it's good to stop here. We've covered a lot of deep ground tonight with this, and this is a discussion that will continue as we kind of keep looking at some of these issues for a few more weeks. Any final thoughts or dying things you have to put out there before we call it for night?
Let's let Kevin have a last word.
No, I think it's been a real discipline to go through this slowly, but I think it's worth it. And these sorts of ideas and people deserve that careful attention from us as we think through them. So we may not have come up with anything novel in response, but I feel like certainly understand it better, and we've given credit where credit's due and have tried to be even-handed.
Yeah, that's certainly our goal. And as we put out every single time, if you disagree with us, let us know. If we got something wrong, come talk to us and explain it. We're open to having people on who have differing perspectives, as long as they can be respectful and have a conversation. We've put this out every week since we kind of started doing this. We haven't had anybody take us up on that yet, but the offer continues to stand to come be a part of this conversation. And in the meantime, since we missed last week, we're going to go right back and stick with our schedule. So you're getting two
back-to-back
discussions back-to-back. So we will be back next Monday to continue this discussion.
Tukey says bye.
WB.